Today I'm going to talk about performance and how to optimize PHP code, really. So I'm not going to talk about everything related to performance, really. So it's just about how you can optimize the PHP code. So I'm not going to talk about how to optimize your front end, JavaScript, and stuff like that. I'm not going to talk about load testing, monitoring, or things like that. So it's really just about profiling. And there are a lot of things that we can talk about. So performance is actually very important for me, and I think you know something about that. So when you are browsing a website, if you wait too long, you probably go elsewhere, right? You switch to something else. And most people do that. And they can wait 3 seconds. And after 3 seconds, they're gone. Probably forever, right? So it means that if your website is slow, you're going to lose customers or user engagement, whatever your website is about. So that's why it's really important to optimize the performance of a website. So obviously nowadays, you need to optimize the back end, but also the front end. And there are a bunch of tools for the front end part with Chrome and Firefox, a lot of different tools. So I like to think about performance as being a feature, like any other one, right? So how many of you are actually developers? Everyone, okay. PHP developers. Okay, non-PHP developers. Okay. So as a developer, you probably write some unit tests, right? Everyone? Not really? Oh, that's fine. How many? Okay, probably 60%, something like that. And I'm pretty sure that if you do not write any unit test, you feel ashamed, right? You're not comfortable now. You say, I know I should, but I don't have time and bullshit like that. And the great thing is that when you have unit tests and a good code coverage, of course, you're really confident when it comes to deploying a website in production, right? You know that if the unit test pass, you can just deploy the code, right? Just works. And if not, it's a bug, you fix the bug, you add one more unit test so that you don't have any regression, right? Okay, so what about performance? How many of you are actually test the performance of a web app before deploying code to production? Okay, how do you do that? What kind of tools are you using? Xdebug. Okay, XHprof? Xdebug? Something else? Blackfire. That's the best answer. It's really good. Huh? Load testing. Okay, that's also a possibility. Okay, but as you can see, probably 20%, something like that. And you are doing that for every single deployment? Yes? No, probably not. I would not believe you anyway, so you can't tell me you're doing that. That's not possible. And that's not possible probably because you don't have the right tools, right? I'm not going to talk about Xdebug per se because I think that it's not a good profiler. Xdebug is really good for a lot of things, but not for profiling something because the overhead is so huge that it can screw the results, which means that the numbers are not really that useful anymore. XHprof is really good. The biggest problem with XHprof is the fact that XHprof was open sourced by Facebook in 2009 or something, but it's not really maintained anymore, right? Because they do not use PHP anymore. They switched to Hack, so they do not have any incentive to actually maintain the code. So which means that Xdebug is not really the best tool for profiling, and XHprof is not really maintained anymore. So what do we have? so first we have this, right? And I'm pretty sure that a lot of you have actually used this function to profile some code, right? Yeah, that makes sense. But that's only, so that's tedious, of course, because you need to change your code. You need to remember to remove those calls afterwards so that you do not merge this code into your repository. And then it's also just about time, the time it takes for a piece of code to execute, right? That's all. But performance is not just about time, it's about a lot of different things. So to be able to really dive into what your code is doing, what you need to be able to do is you need to be able to instrument the code. And that's what Xdebug, XHprof, and Blackfire do. They instrument the PHP code to be able to get as much data as possible about the behavior of your code so that then you can figure out what's going on and how you can fix bottlenecks or improve the performance. So obviously, when it comes to performance, the main dimension is the wall clock time, right? The wall clock time is the time it takes for PHP to execute some code. So most of the time when we are talking about the performance and profilers, the profilers are actually instrumenting the function calls, right? So the wall clock time for a function is the time it takes for PHP to execute a function, right? So the time at the end of the function minus the time at the beginning of the function, right? And the difference is what we call the wall clock time. It's also called the inclusive time. It is called inclusive because it is the time it takes for PHP to execute everything, including function calls, right? So all the children, right? And that's very useful. Inclusive time is very useful to find the critical path of an app, right? And the critical path is really important because if you optimize something that is not in the critical path, it's not going to improve the performance or the time it takes for PHP to actually execute the code, right? So that's why this one is important. And then we also need to talk about the exclusive time of a function call, which is the inclusive time minus all the time it takes for PHP to execute all the children, right? So it's just about the code executed by the function. And this one is really interesting to find the functions that you need to optimize first because by themselves, they consume most of the resources, okay? If you have any questions, anytime, please interrupt me, right? Is that okay? Yep. Okay, so time is two things, right? First, CPU, so the time it takes for the CPU to execute code, and the I/O time. And this I/O time is the time it takes for the CPU to do nothing, waiting for some kind of I/O, right? The I/O can be the network or the disk. So if on a web page you call an HTTP API, the CPU does nothing, just waiting for the API to respond, right? And the same goes for disk. If you are loading a big file from the disk, the CPU is just waiting for the file to be read from disk, right? So the time is the CPU plus the network plus the disk, right? It's not just about the CPU. And so memory is also interesting because obviously the memory is slower than the CPU, which means that if you are storing a lot of things in the memory, it can have a direct impact on the performance, on the time it takes for PHP to do something. So that's also something that you need to have a look at. Okay, I'm going to switch to the next one. Okay, so Blackfire is a performance management solution. It's not just a profiler, and I'm going to explain why. So the first thing is we want to replace the existing tools, right, like XHprof and Xdebug for the profiling part. And so we want to replace those tools with something that is easier to install, easier to use, with hopefully a better UI, with more information. And this tool is free and is going to be free forever, right? So it's not open source, not yet, but it's going to stay free. But that's not enough. That's not enough because we want Blackfire to be part of your development workflow, right? I want you to be able to use Blackfire on a day-to-day basis, not just from time to time when there is something wrong in production or just before big version deployments or whatever. And so if you have a look at the development workflow, so you are working on your laptop, that's the development phase. Then you have the staging environment or the testing environment, your continuous integration workflow, Jenkins, whatever tool you are using. And then you have production, right? So on the production servers, Blackfire is complementary to APMs like New Relic, for instance, right? So New Relic can tell you that there is something slow in production, so some pages are slow in production, and then Blackfire can tell you why those pages are slow and how you can fix that. Right? So that's for production. On the development machines, we want to give you a great tool to easily profile any web app, HTTP request, any PHP code really, even something on the command line. And then there is this continuous integration workflow. And we want to be able to incorporate Blackfire into this workflow so that whenever you push code to your repository, let's say GitHub, for instance, we can give you some insight about the performance changes between the master branch, for instance, and the pull request that you've just submitted. And if the performance is not good enough, then you can have a red flag in the status so that you don't merge the code, right? So the ultimate goal is to fix performance problems before they ever hit production. That's the goal, right? So the first version of Blackfire is optimized for PHP, and we are really focused on PHP, but we're going to support more languages. So we are working on Python. It's going to be the next one. And then we will support also Ruby and Node.js. Right? So it's not just for PHP. And at some point, we will probably also have some information about JavaScript so that you can get the performance profile from end to finish, from the server to the browser. But we are not there yet. Okay, so I'm going to show you how it works. Okay, so the first thing is, to get started, Blackfire is really made of 3 different parts. The first one is a PHP extension. So this is a C extension, like XHprof. The second one is the agent, and the agent is a daemon that you need to install. It is responsible for getting the data out of PHP. It does a lot of things on the data. It compresses everything, and then it sends back all the data to our servers. And the third part is actually the blackfire.io website, where you can visualize your profiles and where you can manage the performance of your web apps. So we have a bunch of options if you want to install Blackfire packages for Debian, Red Hat, macOS, Docker, Chef, Windows. So the PHP extension does not work yet on Windows. We're working on that. Hopefully it's going to be available in the next couple of months or something like that. But you can run the agent if you want. And you can also fall back to manual install, where you just download the binaries and you can install that on your machines. So the PHP extension has no dependencies whatsoever, so it's really straightforward to install that. And the same goes for the agent. The agent is written in Go, which means that everything is in the binary itself. Of course, we depend on libc. And if you are using some of those providers, then it's Blackfire comes built in, so you don't even need to install anything. I'm going to talk about some of them later on and the integration that we have with them. So that's the first step. And then when you have configured your server, you can profile anything. So this is a Symfony.com website. I have Blackfire installed on the server. And so as a developer, you are mainly working with your browser and IDE and probably the command line interface. So, and when you are working on a website, you are mainly in the browser, refreshing the page just to have a look at how things go. So we figured out that being able to profile directly from the browser, especially for the production servers, would be a good idea. So we developed a Chrome extension. And from the Chrome extension, you can profile any page. So I'm going to select no reference. I'm going to talk about references later on. Oh, by the way, how many of you have already tried Blackfire? Okay, you will see that this version is totally different from what you have now. This is the version that we're going to deploy in the next couple of weeks. So this is a brand new version. So I click on profile, and as you can see, it takes some time. So here, what's going on? We want to profile this page. So we get the information, the HTTP information from the browser, and then we take several samples. We take several samples so that we can average them to give you more accurate results, right? Because obviously, if you're a user, Xdebug or XHProf user, you know that you take a profile, you have a look at the profile, you have the critical path, you take another one without any code change, and the critical path is totally different, which means that you can't reason about those numbers, right? So that's why we are taking several samples, so that we can give you stable numbers, right? And then in the toolbar here, you have a summary. So this is the work log time, then the I/O, the CPU time, the memory, anything happening on the network, and database calls, right? And then if you want to have more information about that, you can click on View Profile. You are then on the Blackfire.io website, where I have more information about what's going on. So here, that's too bad. Yeah. Okay. So as you can see here, I have the same summary. The big difference being that now I have more information about, for instance, the number of SQL queries, the DB connection time, all the SQL statements that were executed on the DB, the time it took for the database to actually send back all the data, and the number of times the SQL statements were executed. So we have removed all the sensitive parameters from there. So we don't have any password, we don't have any arguments actually, and that's done by the agent, so on your machines, right? And the same goes for the HTTP request. So now, what do we have? On the right side, we have the call graph. The call graph is a visual representation of the code execution, right? And on the left side, we have this table where all the function calls are listed, right? So by default, here you can see that it's sorted by exclusive time, right? Which means that this is the functions that take most of the resources. And because we are talking here about the work log time, so PDO statement execute is the function that actually takes most of the PHP time. Right? And here on the call graph, so the call graph is interactive, which means that you can zoom in, you can browse the call graph, and in red, this is the critical path. And so I want to mention something here. As you can see here, the call graph is quite small, probably 40 nodes or 50 nodes, right? So one node is actually a function call, right? Yeah? Is that okay? So if we have a look at it again, I can see here that the function call is under row from the HTTP kernel class, and this one calls one time this latest action and so on, right? It is quite small for a reason. So this is a Symfony app, obviously, which means that I probably have thousands of calls, but most of them are too small to be optimized. Right, so there is no point in displaying those nodes here because you cannot optimize them. Right? So instead, what we are doing is that we are aggregating all those small nodes into one aggregate. So we can see here one of them, this one, standard PHP library, the green one, here. So this node is actually the aggregation of all the small function calls coming from the PHP standard library. And again, individually, you cannot do anything about them. You can't optimize them, so there is no point in displaying them. But of course, if one of them is significant enough, then it's not part of the aggregate. So here, strtr, part of the PHP standard library, you can see that I have many calls. So you might want to have a look at why you have so many calls for this specific function. And oh, by the way, the search engine is also a great way to filter out what you don't want to have a look at. So if I want to know everything about PDO, for instance, that's how you can filter things. And then, so you can have aggregate for a lot of things, really. So if I look at PC error, so this is another example of an aggregate. I'm not sure if I have one for PDO. Yeah, I have one for PDO as well. So that way we can really give you all the interesting information about the code execution so that you can really focus on what matters. Okay. So, as I said before, you need to install a PHP extension, but that's all. You do not need to change your code, right? So you do not need to instrument the code yourself. We are doing that from the extension directly. So whenever you ask for a profile via the Chrome extension and other mechanisms I'm going to explain in a minute, we actually ask the server to instrument the code. It also means that if you do not ask for a profile, there is no overhead, right? So the overhead of Blackfire when you do not ask explicitly for a profile is 0 or almost 0, right? That's also interesting if you want to deploy Blackfire on production servers, right? There is no impact. Okay. So, and because we have, also, the thing is, so just because we are instrumenting the code for you, it means that we can hook into the engine really early on, and we can stop the instrumentation very late, right? Which means that we have a lot of information that you can't have from XHPro, for instance, like compile. So this one is the time it takes for PHP to actually compile your files. That's interesting because if you have APC or opcache, this should be minimal. If not, there is a configuration problem somewhere. We also have run, which is the time it takes for PHP to actually run your PHP files. And we also have some unique features. So for instance, we are able to instrument the garbage collector. And we are the only one to do that. So, and that's not that interesting for the web, but for command line tools, long-running scripts, then it can be interesting to have a look at how the garbage collector is actually behaving, right? So that you can know if you can disable it to, get more performance, or if it actually collects some objects, and so you can't really disable it. And because we know all the function names, we know the libraries that you are using, right? So we know that you are using Symfony or Doctrine or PDO or Redis or memcached or whatever. And what we have is we also have metrics, and metrics are interesting information about things that we know you should take care about, right? Take care of. So for instance, here you can see that we have the number of Doctrine entities created for this request, 24. As you can see, I don't have any red flags, which means that it's fine. But let's say that if I have 1,000 Doctrine entities created for this page, that's bad. It's bad because, creating a Doctrine entity takes time and memory a lot. It's slow, really. So if you have too many entities, you would have a red flag because we know that this is what you need to optimize first. So you don't even need to have a look at the core graph, trying to understand what's going on. We know that this is the bottleneck, right? Another example, PDO connections here. So I have one connection to the database, which is fine. 2 of them, that's fine. 10? No, probably not. There's a problem somewhere, right? That happens. And actually, I did a demonstration last week, very big company in San Francisco. we installed the tool and they have 15 connections for every single page. They were not aware. That's a very simple optimization, right? Do not need to have a look at the call graph. You have a red flag, and you can, fix that right away. Any questions? Okay. So this is really just the first step. Oh, of course, if you want to focus on the I/O, just click here, and we'll see that this is exactly the same UI, but now we are really focused on the I/O, which means that the critical path is now for the I/O and not for the work log time. And of course, then you can drill down. So if I take whatever, this one, for every single function call, you have all the numbers for all the dimensions. So the work log time, the I/O, the CPU, the memory, etc., etc. And if you want to focus on something, you can get more information by clicking here. And now the display is a bit different because we really want to understand what's going on here. So we display all the colors and all the colors for this function call. So you have much more information than what we had on the previous screen. A lot of them, really. And if not, it's really easy to add new ones, right? Not yet, but that's the goal. So even if you have some custom framework, you will be able to add your own rules there as well. Yeah. Oh, okay. So if you have Ajax requests, they are not displayed here. It's just about just one request. So I'm going to talk about Ajax in a minute. Okay, so this is the first step. You are on your laptop. You want to figure out what's going on with a piece of code. That's how you can do that. You find some bottlenecks, and then you try to fix them. So you change your code. But is it something that is going to improve the performance of the code? You're not sure. So you need a way to validate that what you've done is actually a good thing for performance, right? Because sometimes you fix something somewhere, but you break something somewhere else, which means that all in all the performance is not improving. So what you can do is, now I'm going to take a profile again, but I'm going to ask for a new reference. So a reference is the baseline. This is the performance of what you have in production, or the master branch, or version 1 of your website, whatever makes sense for you, right? So let's create the new reference. So a reference is a profile that we're going to keep forever, right? So that you can compare the performance of the baseline with the new version of your code, right? So I'm not going to do anything with it. I'm going to switch to another page just to simulate code changes, right? So let's say that I've changed the code. Here on the news page, I have many more database calls, so it's going to be slower, right? But anyway. So I want to take another profile with this page. So by default, the new reference was selected, so I could have changed the name anyway. And I profile again. So now what I want to do is to be able to compare the performance of this web page and the baselines, which was the home page. So you get the numbers same as before, but now you can also have a look at the difference between the baseline and the new version of the code. And this one is slower because I have 6 more requests, which means that I'm consuming more memory, more CPU, more everything really. So this one is much slower than the one before. And if I click on view comparison, as you will see, the UI is almost the same. The big difference is now we are looking at the difference between the baseline and the new version of the code. So the call graph here is really the call graph, the difference between the two pages. So a node here means that it's called before or after. A red one means that the code is actually slower. A blue one, I don't have any here, means that the code is actually faster, right? And again, if I go here, I have the difference between the two profiles. And the same goes for the SQL statements. So as you can see here, I have a bunch of new calls, and for this one it was executed for the home page, but I have an additional request, right? So that's how you can really understand what's going on. Okay. Of course, sometimes you want to be able to profile a post request, a put request, an HTTP API, or a long-running script. And we can do that from the command line interface. So we have a Blackfire tool here. And again, that's a Go binary. I think I'm going to Blackfire curl HTTP Symfony.com like this, right? So it's going to do the same thing as in the browser, but from the command line, right? That's also how you can automate things, right? If you want to integrate that into your own tools, that's possible. So you have the URL and the summary here. And of course, as this is curl, you can say, I want to post, or whatever makes sense, right? You can also control, I'm going to ask for just one sample to make it fast, and I'm going to ask for a JSON representation of the result, right? So, okay, so now we have the JSON representation of the profile, which means that it's even easier to integrate that into your own workflow. So you can see here all the numbers for the envelope. So you have the wall clock time, the network, the I/O, CPU, etc. You also have all the SQL statements and all the numbers from that, right? And so what you can do as well is you can say as new reference to create a new reference, or reference, don't remember which one is 34 or something like that. So it's not really curl, it's curl behind the scene, but we are actually parsing all the arguments, which means that it doesn't matter. It does matter. It means that you need the equal sign here because we can't make the difference between things coming from curl and Blackfire. But behind the scene, we are actually calling curl, so you need curl installed on your machine to make it work. Okay, so I should have used minus JSON, but anyway, you can see that because I've said that my reference is this one, now I have the difference between the reference and the new profile. So talking about AJAX requests, one trick that is kind of interesting here, so that works on Chrome, that works on Safari and Firefox. You can right-click here, copy as curl, like this, and then you can just say Blackfire, bam, right? So if you want to keep the context, that's something you can do. Okay, what you can do as well is run, and then you can run any PHP scripts. Let's do something stupid here, like this. So then again, just because I've prefixed with Blackfire run, I'm going to ask PHP to instrument the code so that I can have, it's not that useful here, but you get the point, right? So that's how you can profile your cron jobs or any script you have in PHP. If you have, so do you have some PHP daemons? Yeah? Many of you? Yeah. Okay. So obviously for daemons, because they are running all the time, you can't rely on automatic instrumentation. So you can also fall back to manual instrumentation for this specific use case. So you can say, if you have a loop, for instance, you can say, I want to start a profiling at the beginning of the loop, stop at the end, and then send a profile for each loop or whatever makes sense. Right? So the question is it possible to profile a post request from the browser? It was possible a few months ago. It's not possible anymore because it's very difficult to get, so the UX was not that great. So we decided to focus on the command line interface for that. But perhaps one day it's going to be back, but for now, no. Okay, so I've talked about how you can use it. So the question is people concerned about sending data to our servers, right? So what you can do, okay, so the first question is we do not have anything sensitive, right? So we have all the function names. Wait a minute, that's the second part of the answer. we have the SQL statements without any arguments. The same goes for HTTP calls. And we have numbers, right? Memory and CPU and stuff like that. So that's not that interesting, really. First answer. So trust us. Second answer is we provide a proxy in plain PHP. So if you go to GitHub, Blackfire, PHP, SDK, and then, okay, I don't remember where that is, but there is something somewhere. We have a proxy, but you can also sniff the data that are sent from the agent to Blackfire, so that you can figure out that there is nothing interesting there. That's weird. So we do have in the bin directory, so we have this Blackfire IO proxy, so you can have a look at the code, and you can use that instead of, so in between the agent and our servers, and you can log everything happening there. You can use any proxy, but this one is interesting because we format the data so that it's easier to understand, right? That's the big difference. And yeah, that's the two answers, really. I can also say that, I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but German people from Germany, they are very sensitive with all the data and stuff, and some German people here, love you guys. And every time I'm doing a demo in Germany, I have the question. But then they install the proxy, and they understand that there is nothing really sensitive. That being said, for very big customers, big ones, we also have an on-premise version so that you can host everything on your servers. So the question is about the breakdown in the memory. So let's have a look. So this is the exact same UI. And you can see here that compile is taking most of the memory. The other loader from Symfony. This one is an aggregation of a lot of different classes coming from Symfony, so the file is big, so that makes sense. Yeah. So this is the exact same representation as for
So
just before, the PHP SDK is great if you already have XHProf deployed on your servers. So Blackfire works with Blackfire extension, but it also works with XHProf and Xdebug, so you can also upload existing traces. So you can say Blackfire upload and something here, something being XHProf, Xdebug, Blackfire, or call grind. So if you are able to output a call grind file, then you can upload that in Blackfire. That's also a possibility. The PHP SDK is also how you can use Blackfire with HHVM and ACK, right? Because in HHVM, they do have an XHProf equivalent, so that's compatible with Blackfire as well. Okay, so we've talked about how to use Blackfire in the development environment. That's the same in the production environment. So if you have a problem or New Relic alerts you about something getting slower in production, you can take a profile and have a look at it on Blackfire. I totally forgot to mention something also on comparisons. The metrics are also compared. Yep, sorry. So, which means that that's also a great way to quickly have a look at the difference between two different profiles. So here you can see the difference in the number of doctrine entities. So if you add a problem here, that's also a way to validate that you actually have less doctrine entities created for the page, or n is a metric, really. Now, I've talked about continuous integration. And to answer your question, we have an API. So you can get the information from Blackfire so that you can integrate that into your own tools if that makes sense for you, right? But we can do better than that. So let's go to, and of course, we store all the profiles that you do with Blackfire. So you can see all the profiles I've made on Symfony.com, the one on the command line. And then you can also compare profiles here directly. And we also have the notion of teams. Teams is a way for you to organize or to collaborate on Blackfire. So by default, with the free version, you are using your own set of credentials to configure a server, which means that there is only one person able to profile a server or a website. When you create a team, so here's the Symfony.com team, it means that all those people can profile the Symfony.com website without installing anything, really. So just the web browser, the Blackfire command line tool, that's all, right? But there is more than that, in the sense that a team is also a project. So here, so big warning, it's not finished yet. So it's work in progress, but it's just to show you what we are working on. So what you can do is, for a project, you can define what performance means for you, right? So you can say, I don't want any web page to take more than 100 milliseconds to be rendered by PHP. Or I don't want any web page to execute more than 10 SQL database calls, something like that. Whatever you want. Or I don't want a web page to create more than 20 doctrine entities, if that makes sense for you, right? So you can do that in absolute numbers or relative ones. So you can also configure the evolution and what you want to be able to track. So you can say, I don't want the newest version of the checkout page to be slower by 10%. Or I don't want, or on the checkout page, I don't want any SQL statements executed. Whatever makes sense, really. So that's how you can configure your performance settings configuration. And then whenever we take a profile, we can tell you if it is good or bad. So here in this example, for the blog path, I'm saying that I don't want the work clock time to be, or I want the work clock time to be less than 1 second, right? For instance. And then you can configure notifications. So here, this is a notification on GitHub. And let's go to this repository, Fabien. I'm going to use this pull request. So as you can see, I've done a lot of things here. So, okay, live demo. Is it going to work? Not sure. Let's try. Fabien test. Yeah, so let's git hello empty. Go. I'm just, creating some new commit so that I can push on the branch. That works. Okay. So it triggers a new build. And so it was fast. So 2 things here. Because my website is on platform.sh, whenever I push code here, it deploys a new environment with the newest version of the code, right? So that I can then profile some pages, right? And then here you can see that the performance is good. Good being that all the rules that you have defined in the configuration actually pass, right? So if I click here on details, you can see that there is one URL and the job succeeded, and you can have a look at the profile. So this one is not that interesting, but let's say that I want this page to take less than 1 millisecond, right? It's not possible with PHP anyway, so let's try again. Push and okay, refresh, and you can see that the performance is getting worse. So you have a red flag. You should not merge this pull request. And then you can see here that this rule, this expression is actually false. So it means that you have a problem with the work clock time, right? And so that's how you can say, I don't want more than 10 SQL statements executed by PHP. If you have more than 10 SQL statements executed for this page, then you would have a red flag. Then you can see the profile and you can understand what's going on and how you can fix the problem, right? So, and that's the ultimate goal, because to be able to do that, you need to be able to deploy your code to some environment so that we can actually, get some profiling information from that. So, I'm not sure if some of you are actually doing that. How many of you are actually deploying the code for every single commit? Okay, good. That's good. That's good. Really. Every pull request, that works as well. Almost. No, I mean almost, because when you merge a pull request, then you have the new version of the master branch, and when you create a new one, you want to be able to compare this pull request with the master branch, which means that we need a profile for the master branch to be able to do the comparison, right? So, how many of you are actually thinking about deploying code for every single commit or pull request? So the question is if we have some kind of integration with Jenkins, and the answer is why not? So we do not have anything specific because there is nothing specific to Jenkins, really. But what we are going to have is, so here, when we have a build, everything happens on our servers. So we trigger the profiling from our servers. But in the next iteration, we're going to have a Blackfire CI tool so that you can, from Jenkins, trigger the profiling yourself, send information back to Blackfire so that you can get the notification in Jenkins. So right now you can do that, but it's a bit more manual, really. But that's also possible. So SQL statements, so we remove all the arguments, the argument values, and so I'm not sure that's very sensitive, really. And the second part of the question was about... You mean us being able to find some security issue because we have those numbers? You mean? Oh, okay. Okay. But, okay, I do understand that. Honestly, we have more interesting things to do, right? But so yeah. When I'm taking a profile here, it works because I am authorized, right? As you can see here, as I'm connected as me, right? And on the server, we have credentials, right? So we check that you are actually authorized on the server. If not, we do not instrument the code. We do not generate any error code, nothing. So that you can't detect that Blackfire is actually installed on the server, right? Which makes, debugging quite funny because we don't have any information directly in the HTTP request, but then we have logs where we have a bunch of data. So again, if you do not ask for a profile or if you are not authorized for this server, nothing happens, right? So all those profiles are not public. No, it's not. It's not tied to the URL. It's really the configuration of the server. So when a request comes in, the first thing that the Blackfire extension does is checking the signature. So we add an additional HTTP header with a signature. We check the signature, and if you are not authorized, then we do nothing. But the authorization is tied with the configuration, the credentials that you configure on the server, right? And those credentials can be for the server or just for one host of the, on the server. It's really fast. Your code is way slower than this check, right? So if you want to have a look at what we are doing behind the scene, we are actually using the same algorithm as the one used to sign the OpenBSD releases. And this algorithm is great because the keys are really short and checking a signature is really fast. It's done in C, so it's really, really fast, really fast. You can't see the difference, really. Add one function call, done. You're slower than the check. So we have the same toolbar in Symfony. with all the AJAX requests. But yeah, the thing is, so the goal is not to replace those toolbars, because they give you more information about the context, and they know that you are using Laravel or Symfony, so the information is not exactly the same. But yeah, so it's not available yet, because to be able to do that, we need to be able to, okay, it's quite possible from the browser, from the command line. Of course, it's not that easy because we do not have the AJAX request. From the browser, it's not available yet. It's going to be available at some point. So it's on the roadmap, but it's not available yet. Also because then we need to be able to have, packages of profiles. So we do not have this notion yet. So it's on a roadmap, so it's going to be implemented at some point. But I do understand that it's kind of interesting to have the main request plus the profiles for all the sub-requests. Yeah, that's a good question. So the question is it possible to profile a web app when disconnected? On a plane, for instance, or in a train? Yeah, that makes sense. So the answer is unfortunately no, because this is a SaaS service. So again, we have an on-premise version, but it's not available yet. So at some point, I think it's going to be available, but it's not. If you want to have all those information, you need to use the Blackfire C extension. If you are using, let me think about that. Yes. Yeah, so because to be able to give you the SQL statements or the HTTP calls, we need some function arguments, and Xdebug or XHProf do not get the arguments. Or is it possible with Xdebug? It's possible probably, but then you have gigabytes of data, so it's not practical. Okay, so that's a good question. So Blackfire takes several samples and then make an average, but of course that only works for GET request, because for any other type of request, if you are deleting a user or creating a new one, if we take several samples, that doesn't work. And that's why on the command line, by default, the number of samples is 1, right? So if you want more than one sample, you need to specify the number yourself, minus samples, something. But by default, on the command line, we only take one sample, sorry. And in the browser, because we can only profile GET request, by default, it's more than one, but if you are not sure, you can disable aggregation here, right? So that's also a possibility. So that's a great feature when you are auditing a website. So you make an audit, so you don't know what's going on. So first, you disable aggregation so that you really understand what's going on. Then you can enable that later on. The integration with PHP 7. So we started to work on the PHP 7 extension last week. So we wanted first to wait for PHP 7 to stabilize, but we are working on it. So it's going to be available at some point, yeah. Probably before PHP 7 is actually stable, hopefully. But that's a huge amount of work. PHP 7 is totally different. I mean, internally, that's totally different. So it's almost as, starting from scratch, almost. Okay, so like the execution plan or trying to explain the SQL statement or something like that. For a very simple reason is, the reason is that New Relic doesn't give enough information to make it really useful. If you know a way to get interesting information, I would be, very happy to integrate Blackfire and New Relic. But as far as I know, there is no way to get, for a slow request or a slow transaction, there is no way to get the URL that was profiled or things like that. So it's not that useful for us. Or put another way, we would need a lot of manual, configuration to make it work. But I might be wrong. Okay, so the goal is not to be able to replace New Relic or any other APMs, really, because the goal is totally different. What we're going to do is for key transactions, if we're taking the same concept from New Relic, being able to take or to profile specific pages on a regular basis. Because I think it's really useful to be able to say, okay, I want a trend for the home page every day at 8, right? Or because there is a huge amount of traffic. Or I want to take the profile of the checkout page, I don't know, at 11 p.m. because the traffic is really low. Because then you have something that you can really reason about. This is the same page at the same time, right? But Blackfire is very different from New Relic because we are not trying to give you information about real users. We want to give you information about the performance of your code from a general standpoint, really. That's the big difference. And by the way, I don't want to compete with New Relic. So Blackfire needs internet connection to be able to send data to Blackfire, and then if you want to actually have a look at a profile in the UI, you also need the other way around. So it's both ways. Oh, the server itself is just being able to push data back to Blackfire. No, both ways. Both ways, because the agent is also responsible for getting the keys from the server from time to time. So we have a signature mechanism, and so the keys are rotated from, on a regular basis. So we need a way to give you the newest key so that we can check the signature. So it's so the question is if you can compare from compare a profile from production and from a staging environment or laptop or whatever. You can do that, but then you need to be aware that you can have some differences, right? Because the servers are not the same. So if we are talking about SQL statements or HTTP calls or memory, it's going to be almost the same from one server to the next one. So you can compare that pretty easily. But for CPU time, it can be a bit different, right? Depending on the CPU, depending on a lot of different factors, really. So that's possible, but that's not my recommendation, really. That's also why when you are doing continuous integration, you need to be sure that the performance of your staging environment is actually pretty stable, right? Yeah. We are working on that and trying a workaround. So we will probably have a good news in the next couple of weeks, probably, so that you can really compare two profiles coming from two different machines and still get useful information out of that. So you were saying that the production environment is big compared to the number of users, so you do not really have performance problems, right? Small, yeah. Okay, so that's a very good question, because I think Blackfire is also very useful to be able to pinpoint regressions, right? So mistakes, really. So you have a web page, it's quite fast or fast enough, and then you have this, n+1 SQL problem, right? Which means that all of a sudden you have thousands of SQL statements executed on the database, and then it doesn't matter if you have, a small number of users. It's so slow that it doesn't work anymore. So Blackfire is also here to help you find out all those regressions and mistakes, really. So it's almost the same as with unit tests. You did, a big mistake. It's really easy to find out. It's really easy to fix it, but you need a tool to actually give you the info. For instance, yeah. So one thing you can do as well, but that's so you can deploy on your staging environment before deploying to production if you have one, and then run a set of profiles for key URLs and compare that to the latest version or the current version in production. Or if you do not have a staging environment, then you deploy, cross your fingers, be really quick and you get some profiles, and if everything is fine, done. If not, fix as fast as possible and deploy. but it really depends on the maturity of your architecture and organization, really. Yeah. So I think the thing is, you can start small. You can start by using Blackfire just as a profiler tool on your laptop, and then, or in production to understand what's going on. And then, whenever you add some, features to your development workflow, whenever you add Jenkins or GitHub or whatever, then you can grow with Blackfire. So it's not just for people with, the perfect tool chain. On your mobile, it's not available, right? Yeah, because this is the version, as I told you, this is the version we're going to deploy next week, actually. Okay, I can give you the prices. You want me to click here? Really? It's not. Okay, I can do that, but it's not definitive yet. So if it's a bit different next week, that's a possibility, really.
That's free country.
So free, 0. It's not going to change. Basic enterprise. Basic is that cheap, really? So 100 euros per month, and for the enterprise version, it starts at $5,000 a year. Good question. So it's per. So the 100 euros per month is really for a team. So it's unlimited number of servers, unlimited numbers of project or whatever. It's really just for one person. And for the enterprise version, it's per user. Right, so it's something around, sorry if I make a mistake, but I think it's something like 30 euros or dollars, that's almost the same, per user per month. 24 hours is for standard profiles. But for reference profiles, we keep them forever, obviously, because if not, that doesn't make any sense anymore.